And so thank you all very much. I'd like to ask a couple of questions of some of the speakers first, based on some of those talks. And I'd like to get the ball rolling with Gabriel. Gabriel, Mike started off by telling the story of the wind measurement mast near his home that had gone up without any consultation. Is this a way for wind developers to build trust with local communities? When trust is so important for these long-term relationships, how can local communities have trust when they hear stories like this?
Yeah, it's an interesting. First of all, I would like to say that it wasn't a Bord na Móna wind mast that was put up. The reality is that to put up that wind mast, and I don't know the specific details, to be quite honest with you, that had to go through a planning process. You had to get planning permission to put it up. And as part of the planning process, there's a consultation. And it's at that stage that, and I don't know the details, but it goes through a planning process. Now, you may question the veracity of that planning process, and that's his opinion, and it's for him through his network and through lobbying and so forth to try and influence the proposed amendments that the minister is proposing to introduce regarding planning permissions for these sort of developments. I don't have an issue per se with what Mike is saying. I can agree with everything that he's saying. From a Bord na Móna point of view, I will take some, and we can divert into peat-fired stations. Bord na Móna have one, and that's very much well on the way now to be a coal-fired station, and ultimately for peat to be removed from it. For 6 years, or since I've come in, and with our new contract with Nature, we don't open any new bogs. We're not opening any new bogs. We've taken very careful advice. Some of the bogs that we have opened that there hasn't been so much damage done, we shore up and we rehabilitate. In many cases, we hand it back to the local community. So, for instance, outside of Abbey Leaks, there's a very significant bog area that was in that. In other bog areas that are half or more harvested, then the best advice is to actually harvest them to completion. Because, and that's from Professor Hans Houston and other experts, global experts on peat rehabilitation, where this advice is, this is the most environmentally sustainable thing to do. And that's what we're doing with regards to our peatlands. We manage quite a lot of peatlands. So the concept of closing peat-fired stations, the problem is that, if you like, the damage has been done, so to speak, and rather than the carbon going up the stack of the power station quite rapidly, it actually is going up quite slowly from these exposed peatlands through oxidation. So that's another discussion, though. But seeing that you mentioned about the peat-fired station, now just let me finish.
The meat mask required no planning permission.
We'll just let Gabriel finish his point here.
Well, I know from our point of view, we have wind mass on our lands, and we've got vast tracts of lands in the Midlands, and we have had to get planning permission. So I don't know what happened up there. I can't be, maybe,
I think if you check the wind planning guidelines at this current state, you can put a met mask out for a period of time without planning permission.
Well,
only for a short period of time.
All of the ones that we have, a short period of time is not valid.
I think it's 18 months, if I'm correct.
Yeah, you have to build, to look at the economics of this, you have to look at over quite a while. So all that I can say is from our point of view, and Bord na Móna were the first company to build, own and operate a commercial wind farm in Ireland, which we still have up in northwest Mayo back in 1992 in Bellicorick, 7.5 megawatt wind farm, 330 kilowatts, that was the capacity of the day, and that's still rolling, that's still producing renewable energy. Obviously the plant has been, or the turbines have been fully depreciated at this stage. The economics of wind particularly stack up in Ireland, and that's because of the wind the wind regime that we have here. And that's
Okay.
universally accepted.
I'd like to come back to the economics in a few questions' time, hopefully. I just want to ask a similar question to John. John, you said that you had objectors the second time you applied for planning permission.
Right.
How did you deal with well, I don't want to say how did you deal with the objectors, but how did you work around this? Because obviously you obviously you ended up building your wind farm, and how was this dealt with?
Well, look, I mean, planning is planning. Everybody is entitled to look at a planning application, and if they feel there is grounds to object, they're perfectly entitled to do so. And to think any different would be wrong. But all we could do was comply with the planning regulations that were in place at the time, and we were well within those regulations. And it is sort of unusual, and I don't mean any disrespect to Mike here, but initially we had no objections, and in the intermediate time, a couple of people not from the area had settled within the area, and they were at the forefront of the objections. And that's probably not a fair comment, but that was the case in our case. And
Is it that people had come to the area specifically for
no,
the
they're
rural?
just rural
lifestyle?
And when they looked at that thing, obviously there was already a planning application that had been granted, and maybe they may not have known that, but that wasn't our fault, and that's every planning situation is different, and it's different in every community, and it's different in as much as the individuals that are involved. And I think that just when it comes to this situation, everybody has to be reasonable, and everybody has to take on board that everybody else has rights in the situation. Mm-hmm. And I think for any government or local authority to put in place planning laws that are unfair, that do not comply with safe and reasonable noise levels, would be ridiculous.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I think John alludes to being reasonable. I would be quite happy to be reasonable if people who loved wind energy, people who are very green-minded people, would go around buying up the houses of people who are deserting them because they live near wind turbines. That would be fair, and that would be reasonable. It would be reasonable if Borden Móna, a publicly owned company, which I am a shareholder and you are a shareholder, listen to what people who are living near turbines actually are saying, instead of listening to their bank balance and looking at the profit projections which are coming forward. The reality is people are angry and are hurting, and I mean hurting. And if you haven't met those people, go out and meet them, bring them here so you get a sense of their pain. Now, why aren't communities objecting? You're right. The reality is if you're brought up in a community all your life in rural Ireland, the last thing you do is speak up against your neighbour. So what you have is a build-up of quiet resentment in communities. And it does overblow. I know of one area where a wind farm has planning and a shotgun has been produced, and we're not going to say where it is or whatever, it was given the information because of rising tensions which occurred between families, where one family has got a number of wind farms making a lot of money and someone else has not. And it just becomes a very divided community. And it's not just about money, folks. It's about changing the complete landscape of your area. Go out to Lettergunnet and look at the beautiful Connemara landscape and look around. There's 4 wind farms all around there being built. And think about the transformation of that landscape, which is going to be at least 30, 40 years, that transformation, if not more. And then think about, is this really worth it? When technology is changing so rapidly that wind farms may not be on land where it's going to be. There's floating wind farms being developed now, which could be out to sea, which in the end could become much more economic than what's actually happening with wind turbines on land. We don't know yet. The reality is the technology is changing so rapidly. We don't need the electricity in Ireland right now. We've already heard today from Gabriel that actually, from Rory, that actually, we've got far too much energy at the moment. We don't actually need it you know, our energy use has decreased. Why are we going around destroying our landscapes where maybe in 10, 15, 20 years' time, the technology will be so different that those wind turbines will no longer be seen as efficient, reliable, whatever. And who's going to dismantle them?
Yes, Gabriel.
Just actually, as that photograph is going around, I'd like to see it because there's so much kind of hot air coming from this side of me here, hot wind. The reality is this, Mike, that because you seem to have painted Móna as some big monster that's just rocking up to places and just putting up big turbines, not going through any process, not consulting. Well, that's the sense that I'm getting from what you're saying. You know, we're not aligned with other developers. You're dead right in saying that we are like a big community organisation. I don't get any extra money whether there's a big turbine or a small turbine or no turbine. And the issue is this, is that in all of our developments, bar none, down in Brocana, where we're building at the moment quite a significant wind farm, we had no objections. We consulted extensively with the local community. I'm sure, John, you probably would be aware of it because extensively with the local community. All of the areas that we are proposing to put turbines in are post-industrial peatlands. They tend to be in the middle of nowhere, literally. And this is a vast area of 80,000 hectares of land. And actually, most of the communities that are around are of Móna extraction, shall we say. The Midlands of Ireland was an area of characterised by abject poverty, emigration, until Móna and indeed the ESB and others came shortly after the formation of the state. And that's where the communities that have risen there, they're used to energy infrastructure. I don't dispute for 1 minute that somebody who is living in an area that they've been living all their life should not have the right to have their view heard and should not also get fully remunerated, compensated for the impact that this is going to have. Or indeed, if it is a particular house or whatever, that the developer does not go down and do a deal to buy the house or whatever. I've got no objection at all to that. Móna generally are not in that position. Our proposals are all literally in very, very isolated areas. And to date we've had little or no objections. Well, actually, I must confess we did get a significant objection, a fairly reasonable objection with our development in Mount Lucas, and that was from the local parachute club. And I suppose, in fairness to them, they had a point. But again, we dealt with it properly and to their satisfaction.
What I want to say is, Gabriel, the issue is not money. When I talk to people, they don't want compensation. They don't actually want money. What they want is the distance from their houses of wind turbines to be much further away than what it is. What we want the likes of Móna and other semi-states to do is to show leadership and actually, in their wind farms, make sure they are an adequate distance from people's houses. Make sure I would love a semi-state company to roll behind us and say, yes, we support you. 10 times 10 distance seems like an appropriate distance for wind turbines to be. And the interesting thing is, I actually went to an IASW conference, and a few pints afterwards with some of the people who were wind farm developers, they privately said to me they did think a lot of wind turbines were too close to the houses. But they couldn't say that publicly. And I would love a semi-state company to actually take responsibility. And we're not anti-wind. We're saying we want a semi-state company to take responsibility to protect the people who live near wind turbines.
Okay. Can I ask economics have been alluded to a few times by I think all of you. The latest Bord Gáis Energy Index was released a few days ago. This is the index that tracks the cost of different forms of energy in Ireland, and it showed a 1% increase on the previous month. But nowhere, certainly in the summary of that report, was wind mentioned as a factor in any of the rises. Does wind actually reduce the cost of electricity in Ireland? And, like,
Well,
Gabriel,
actually,
I'll put that to you first.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. Actually, in the same, if you look at it closely, you will see that the wholesale price of electricity, actually quite uniquely, because electricity prices and gas prices track each other. They're a linear relationship. But over the last couple of months, because it's been particularly windy, if you look at it very closely, you will see that that has uncoupled. The wholesale price of electricity has actually reduced because of the quantity of wind that's been brought onto the system. So the economics of it absolutely do stack up. Now, with regards to the profitability and so forth, the issue about wind is that it's a highly capital intensive. The issue is to get your investment. It's like you heard from John, his biggest issue, notwithstanding the ESB moratorium and wind
which
or
was
whatever,
unavoidable,
which
yeah.
throws to another issue. The biggest issue is actually getting the capital investment. And that's the role of a refit or a floor price that is a guaranteed price is actually to enable developers, local developers, and I fully support, in fact this is the Templederry initiative that John has outlined is actually the ideal type of scenario that we would be very, very happy to promote that and that concept. That is the ideal and that where everybody gets a benefit.
Is this a model that Bord na Móna might see itself pursue at some stage?
Well, John actually mentioned about, when Bord na Móna are leasing sites and so forth. Bord na Móna are very different to any of the other companies. We build, own and operate our own wind farms. We have the technology, we have the capability, we have the planning capability. There's an awful lot of ecological studies, there's an awful lot of consultation with communities and so forth. And that's what Bord na Móna are good at, and that's why we're in this business, for the benefit of the shareholder. It's the Irish state that's going to benefit from Bord na Móna adding significant value to state lands that are, as I say, they're literally in the middle of nowhere, post-industrial, brownfield, literally and metaphorically speaking, sites. So, yes, absolutely, we don't lease land, John. So that's not we don't lease land to
That's
developers
something you could
and so
change.
forth. Well,
You're in a position to do that.
yeah, in certain cases we would. Mike, you mentioned about being, aligned with other developers and so forth. We've got a very, very clear view, for instance, about our clean energy hub, which is because of the quantity of wind and the expanse of the land holdings, and because of technology and the capability to transfer electricity efficiently without losses using high voltage direct current systems. We see a real opportunity for Ireland to be a net exporter of wind. Now, when you get to the scale that we're talking about here, then rather than Enercon, and it's very interesting that Enercon is your system provider, Enercon and others will establish manufacturing facilities here. There's a very good example down in Portugal, where the Portuguese government, a number of years ago, auctioned, if you like, it's a little bit over a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of capacity from their grid. They got various consortia to bid into it. A consortia won that included their grid, National Grid and Enercon. Part of the winning consortium, part of the deal, the way that the actual competition was constructed, was there had to be a significant amount of local content, with local jobs and local opportunities and local value to local economy, or to the local economy. Well, that wind farm, and it's actually a number of clusters scattered around Portugal, has been built out. Enercon and their sub-suppliers, for instance, the blade manufacturers are there, the resin manufacturers that supply the blade manufacturers are there. They're still there, but now they're exporting all of their wares to different parts of the world. It's sustaining approximately 1,500 jobs, high-value jobs down in the manufacturing side, plus about another 50 jobs on the maintenance side.
Okay.
So there are big economic benefits for this. We're not aligned, just to get this, Mike, we're not aligned with, we see a big opportunity in the vast peatland areas of the Midlands to do this.
Then work with
You know.
rural communities and actually set reasonable setback distances so your wind turbines are much further away from houses. Do you think that's an appropriate distance for a wind turbine to be from a house?
Well, you know what, Mike, it's 800 metres from this home. I don't know who measured it, and I'd want to actually check.
That's the first
This
wind
is one
turbine
of
you've
the-
got on your flagship operation, the one
Yeah.
that you've been proclaiming in Mount Lucas. That's the first wind turbine built.
And we have had no objections to it.
Well, just look
Yeah.
how close it is to that house.
Can we
Yeah.
can we just return to the economics question for a moment? Mike, I see you've got some information. I'll come to you in a moment. I just wanted to ask on the jobs question to John. John, if you're interested in keeping rural communities going and bringing new life to the area, there's not many jobs in a rural community with a wind farm now. Do you think there could be better ways of spending that same money?
I don't think it would bring as much, there isn't a better way of bringing that much money into the economy, into the local economy. And that money will be spent within the local economy, which indirectly creates the jobs. I mean, when you look at the economy that you were speaking about on Móna scale, that is actually a no-brainer. Everybody in the state owns the company. It's replacing the importation of £5 billion worth of
But this is such a capital-intensive industry, and if we're not making any of the components here in Ireland, are we actually gaining that much?
Well, that's the stage hopefully we're arriving at now, because no turbine manufacturer was going to set up jobs in this country unless it could see in advance that there was going to be large-scale wind development. But now that that is on the horizon, all these companies are looking at it, and there isn't a doubt in the world that a lot of jobs will accrue. And look, we all sympathise with where Mike is coming from.
Well, do something about it, John. That's what we need to see happening. Not sympathy.
Yeah, but
we want people. We want you to campaign for it. We want you to campaign for it. We want you to listen to us, not just sit there and nod our heads and say have sympathy. We want you to actually say yes, we support them. They support us. We'll support you if you support us.
You know what, Mike? I just want to come back to this thing about planning, because we go through extreme caution and care to ensure that we follow all the procurement rules and regulations pertaining to big developments and indeed medium-sized developments like that. Now, unfortunately, that is not the case in other situations. And planning is the issue here. It's not planning is the issue. And getting the rules around planning and getting sustainable planning. It's interesting, I see outside here, is there a conference on sustainability or sustainable communities and sustainable living going forward? We have to get a much more sustainable model to get our communities and getting towns and villages working more efficiently together. That's not to say that we can't have houses. We need houses out there. Farmers need to be beside their land and so forth. But towns and villages are dying on their feet at this point in time, simply because the population is too dissipated. For a relatively small, sparsely populated country, we have the most dissipated organisation in terms of where people live of any other country in Western Europe. And this sort of efficient planning needs to be brought in. I'm not talking about existing dwellings, that's there. I'm talking about going forward. We have to have, this is just part of a much more sustainable methodology of communities living and working together.
Mike, I see. Did you want to make a comment on the
I'll
economics
yes,
situation?
Now, one comment on this. If we're talking about planning, what we would love you to do as Board Móna is there is now a week to go before the final submissions go on the wind energy guidelines. We would like Board Móna to actually put a submission in and say, yes, we think wind turbines should be 10 times the turbine height away from houses. We think where they are now is too close to people's houses. Hooray! We're speaking for that, but that's not going to happen because Board Móna is building wind farms within the current guidelines, which are 500 metres, and the current guidelines are wrong. And they're bad for communities, because if you go to Lettergunner, people are selling and leaving their homes because of the wind farm. It's bad for communities. Let's get very clear.
Well, actually, I disagree with you. But, like, for instance, if that were the case, I'm sure the Templederry facility would not have been built.
They're making €30,000 a year per person in it.
Well, you know what?
Of course they stay there. Their property goes up in value.
They're also saving quite an amount in greenhouse gas emissions. They're also
Absolutely.
saving on the import
I have
bill.
no issue with it.
And people have to understand
Absolutely.
that what's the benefit of doing that? The benefit is that you reduce the 6-7 billion euros that we're spending every year
Absolutely.
importing in unsustainable fossil carbon intensive fuels. And as John has said, keeping a lot of rich Arabs in the style that they're accustomed to.
Totally.
Why don't we start capturing some of this value and some of this wealth?
Yeah, I think just before you move on, if Mike reduced what he is looking for, if that distance of 10 times were brought back in a little bit, then you would probably start to get a bit more cooperation from the people who are coming from the other side. Because if these people here live in rural communities, and any one of them have a hill at home, I guarantee you there isn't one hill in rural Ireland that there isn't a house within 2 miles. So they're the people who you're going to wipe out of this industry. But Móna have vast tracts of land. They have no problem complying with these regulations. If noise levels are set and agreed upon, we in rural Ireland, we know the noise that a tractor and a slurry spreader makes when they're we're used to noise. We have had to put up with noise at every level, at every level of development. Every new development that takes place in agriculture has a noise element to it. If there's a safe element of noise established, a safe measurement of noise established, and everybody can comply with it, I think then that's what has to be progressed.
Okay, well, I think I'd like to come to the audience now. I've asked enough questions here, so if there's some questions, I see the first hand up here. We do have some microphones, yeah, so if you could wait, if someone could get a microphone up to the gentleman here in the suit, near the back, yeah.
Hello, Brendan Mulligan is my name. I'm delighted to be here and hear this rational debate for once about wind energy, and I congratulate you all for keeping it rational. Gabriel identified the problem as spatial planning, and I think Mike has confirmed absolutely that that's what it's all about. It's all about spatial planning. And it's something we have never done well in this country and continue not to do well. And really, we need, it's all about sustainability. And we really need to address that debate. And before we ever did a national renewable energy plan, we should have been having discussions like this about what kind of society we want to live in, how are we going to provide energy for that society, and have a proper, rational, honest, well-informed discussion about it, and then come to some agreement. And by agreement, I don't mean that 100% of the people have to agree, because they can't, because this is a democracy. You're never going to please everybody. But the problem at the moment is that we get engaged in rows about individual projects rather than standing back and have a discussion about the big picture. Is how are we going to live in this country going forward? We talk about destroying the landscape. Global warming will destroy our landscapes. We want to go to Inishbofin and see what it has done to Inishbofin after the storms. That will destroy the landscape as well. The landscape now is not the same as it was 1,000 years ago. Yet we seem to want to protect it and freeze it in aspic right the way it is now. It has always changed. And if we don't do something about renewable energy and address global warming, that will change the landscape for us. We talk about noise. I grew up in County Longford in the countryside. I had to try and sleep at night with corn crakes all around the house. Who keep me awake? Now, it would not be acceptable for me to go out then, and certainly not now with a shotgun and deal with them, you know. But I mean, so we get hung up about noise and all sorts of things. You know, there is noise in the countryside. When the wind blows, the leaves in the trees rustle, and that will drown out a lot of the noise from wind turbines, and that's a fact. But we need to stand back from this. We're so focused on individual projects, and we get involved in negative engagement instead of dealing with the big picture and looking at it in a positive way and engaging positively with each other and developing an overall agreement that this is how we want to live for the next 50 years in this country. We don't want to be importing oil. We don't really want to be destroying the planet. So how are we going to do it? And I think Mike asked Gabriel there to support this move to 2 kilometres of a setback, well, 10 times, whatever it is. I wouldn't, I would guard against making a rapid decision on that. But I think you would find, if you set down on a map all the individual houses in the country and drew 2 kilometres around them, there's probably nowhere left, bar the bogs maybe, where you could put wind. And if that's what we decide we want to do, then okay. But let's have the discussion about it in an informed manner, and let's make our plans. That's what I have to say.
So what happens to the people living in those houses? Can I ask a question? If those decisions are made, what happens to those people living in those houses? And I'll just challenge you on the noise thing.
Yeah.
I can live with a few weeks of crowing cakes, corn crake, bird noises. Yeah. I can live with a tractor. I live in the rural area, doing harvesting the hay, at midnight, a few nights of the year. But I don't think I can live with every night having the same repetitive, intermittent noise, which people who live wind turbines say, and it's a repetitive noise that happens on a regular basis, and you can't walk away from it. It doesn't go away after a couple of weeks. It's there constantly for the next 20 years. That's the difference.
Yeah. If it's there, I think there are ways of mitigating noise. But this is what we have to do, is we have to agree up front that this is what we're going to do.
Well, what are we going to do?
What?
What are we going to do?
Well, if I might, if I might, technology is actually making, you make a point about distance and then you talk about noise. Well, which is it, noise or distance? So recent technological developments, and there's a big focus on bringing on the next wave. You're quite right, technology is moving, is actually dealing with this noise issue in terms of the manufacturers, and they're making significant progress in reducing the noise impact. So I think the point also about, the amount of one-off housing, and I'm not going to get into that debate. I'm from the country, from a town in the country, but the amount of one-off housing that the country has been, blighted with is about the best way to describe it, including in these beautiful parts of Connemara and elsewhere, is would mean, if you were putting in those sort of restrictions, that we wouldn't be building wind farms or wind turbines anywhere. Now, I think you're dead right, Brendan, if that's what we want, because I'm a servant of the state, if that's what we want, then fine, let's do that. I'm not shoving anything down anybody's throat other than to say, in my opinion, this is the right thing. This is where Ireland stands. Where are we going to get our energy from? It's not as if we had too many options, So,
okay. Well, I'm a servant of the state too, and I think the citizens of the state might have a few more questions. So, there's a question at the back up there. Can we get a microphone up the back, please? Thanks. I know it's very steep here.
How are things? John Mulcahy is my name. First of all, great speeches out of Ollie. I'll start off on a positive note. John, I think it was brilliant. Just a point for each, Gabriel and Mike. Gabriel, you mentioned clustering in your speech, and I think theoretically it's great, but within Ireland, and the way you also went on then later on to borderline contradict yourself by saying farmers need to be by their land. The way the community works in Ireland, I don't think clustering would work. It's a great theoretically, but I don't think it's practicable in Ireland, especially in the community.
And why is that, do you think?
From a practical point of view, we'll say if from where I'm from, you're farmers, you're a son of a farmer, if we'll say I'm not permitted to build a house, a once-off house out near where my land is, or my parents are still in their house, I have to progress, make my own life, I need a house. So do I buy within the town, and then you say it cuts down on driving to school, driving to the shops? I then have to drive out there. There's pros and cons, to everything, but practically I don't think it works within our rural community. And just before I finish then, for Mike, some great comments. You mentioned one about technology, and in 20 years' time, technology will have progressed and maybe some of these wind turbines will be out of date. That's all very well and good, but if that was the case, if we were all to sit back and wait for 20 years, we wouldn't have iPhones, we wouldn't have these projectors. You have to try and progress to learn. It's not going to happen overnight. And fair play, you can see with Bord na Móna, they're converting or reusing some of the outdated bogs or misused bogs. That's going to have to happen, and whoever's in charge of it will have to deal with that. But you can't just sit back and wait for 20 years for the solution to come out, because then it won't happen.
But Rory, if we don't need the electricity right now, which we don't, the only reason why we're doing this is because we're trying to meet European targets which have been set. And right now we don't actually need the electricity.
Well, then stop importing oil
But hang on, can I ask you a question? We've got 2 new gas stations being built. Gas stations produce half the emissions of peak-fired power stations and coal-fired power stations. We haven't even looked at energy conservation. There's far more savings to be made in energy conservation. How many people here have smart meters in their homes? How many people have meters in their homes that when there's no movement in the house, the lights turn off? How many people here have electric cars? How many people have actually gone through their house and re-insulated the whole house and so forth? There's far more jobs than that than there'll ever be in wind energy. And there's far more, I read an article in Spiegel, there's much more energy saving in energy conservation than anything else.
I just like to jump in there on the...
Can I just answer the question? Just to, Rory, to answer your question, Tom, is it?
John, sorry.
Oh, John, sorry. No, in clustering, I specifically pointed out that absolutely, if you're a farmer or if you are working in the countryside, well then absolutely you should be living where your work is. It's not the agricultural community that I will be directing my comments towards. It's towards all the other folk that are there. Fine, they're there now, but going forward in spatial planning, it's a little bit like what Brendan says. We need to have a much more sustainable. Yes, small towns and villages are dying because the population is dissipated. If people, and it's unsustainably so. If people lived in those towns and villages, in those conurbations, the opportunity to have a much more efficient infrastructure emerges. That doesn't exist at the moment, and that's why our water systems are failing. The groundwater pollution is so big, why it's so expensive. We have infrastructure is expensive here. By the time you get water, street lighting, and all the rest built out to all this to support the sort of ribbon development that we've experienced.
I'd like to jump back in with a question here. Mike made a very interesting point there about energy conservation. Back in January, the European Commission voted to scrap binding renewable energy targets for the European Union. There had initially been an initiative called 20-20-20, so 20% reduction in CO2, 20% renewables, and 20% efficiency by, was it 2020 or 2030? I'm not exactly sure of the date.
It's gone to 2030 now. They've changed.
Okay.
It.
Okay. So
it's their targets are going to 2030.
Yeah. So there's so they're changing their targets. They're having an overall 40% emissions reduction target for 2030, with nothing specifically to say renewables.
Yeah.
That's right.
Is
this going to make some of the arguments here moot? Is this going to say that the economics have now changed, that wind will potentially be less supported?
No. A lot of the reason, if you will actually see it, if you go into the fine, what they're focused on is on greenhouse gas reductions. That target is there, and the 2050 target is there. The 2030 target is now emerging, and the 20. Certain economies, such as Britain and others, who are going to struggle to meet their renewable energy bit, are saying, well, why can't we meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets by deploying nuclear energy, for instance? So there are certain economies that would propose that and that are pushing, and that's where, so the Commission has said, well, okay, fair enough, the key issue here is greenhouse gas reductions. From an Irish point of view, well, we have decided, unless we decide to open the whole Carnsore Point debate again. In fact, it's interesting, Mike was talking about shale gas and the opportunity. Well, There was a prospector up in my part of the world, up in Leitrim and Fermanagh, that was just trying to check out, well, do we have stuff up there? And they were hounded off the park, in effect, even before we even established, well, what the hell is there? So, you know, from Irish point of view, where's our opportunity? Our opportunity is in renewable energy and bioenergy. I come back to this point about peat. We've got peat-fired stations. They are being converted, and even Derry is well on the road to be converted into a biomass. And why shouldn't we? Irish trees, and trees in Ireland, grow 20% faster than trees in any other part of Europe. 20% faster. It's for the same reason that we have a buoyant beef and dairy industry. It's not because our farmers drive their tractors any faster than the French ones or whatever. It's because of our climate and because of the rich pasture we've got. And it's the same in the forestry sector. So where's Ireland's opportunity? It's in renewable energy and in bioenergy.
Mike, do you see are you relieved to see the specific renewable targets being removed?
And I'm not an expert in this area. All I can do is read what Colm McCarthy, who's an economist who has a lot of expertise and is a renowned and highly regarded economist, is saying. And he is saying clearly, with this change to actually making these targets not just based on renewables, it opens up to a debate which we need to have in Ireland. Because essentially we've looked at renewables as the only way of getting these targets met. And what he is arguing now is we now need to look beyond that and have the debate and consider all the energy options, like conservation. Why aren't we funding massive projects in energy conservation? Why instead are we subsidising wind energy companies to grow wind energy? Why aren't we looking at biomass? And I will agree, why aren't we looking more clearly and more closely at biomass? Why aren't we reopening the debate about nuclear energy? Why not reopen it? I mean, I read somewhere in the Telegraph that one modern nuclear wind plant replaces 30,000 wind turbines. That's a huge amount of, I mean, you know, let's look at the options. I'm not saying that I'm an expert in anything, and I'm not claiming myself to be in favour of this thing or the other, because I'm not an expert. I would like to see Colm McCarthy and other experts have a public debate on this, and for us to debate it, not just to blindly follow targets which we've set several years ago. Let's discuss it, let's debate it, and let's look at all the options. What we feel as communities who live near wind turbines, we were never part of that debate. And we are just having these imposed upon us, causing us to put up with the noise, causing our properties to value so they can't be sold, having negative impacts on our health as well too. And that's what we're seeing. Now you might argue the point, but you go and meet these people, talk to them, find out for yourself. There's large meetings happening in the Midlands on a regular basis. Have anyone been to those meetings? Some of those meetings have 300, 400, 500 people concerned about wind turbines.
John?
Yeah, well, we're looking at the taxpayers of the future here. And whether it's 2020 or 2030 is irrelevant to the taxpayers of Ireland if they can replace imports of 5 billion with something that is produced here with a natural resource. I mean, to me, the economics, I know nothing about economics, but a child could figure that out. If we can add 5 billion to this economy, no youngster need emigrate. Every local community would regenerate itself in a very short space of time. Wind could put this country back on its feet in fairly rapid time. I don't like sort of blowing the trumpet of large-scale developers, because we've all sort of had our sort of doubts about some of their motives, and it's terrible if pension funds in Canada or Germany or wherever are exporting the profits of our wind abroad. But thankfully, at least we have Móna here, which is owned by all of us, and I mean, the economy, the economics just stack up one after the other. If we are an exporter of green energy, not just providing what we need ourselves, we can become an exporter of green energy.
Okay. We'll go back to the audience, the gentleman up there beside the blue hoodie.
How you doing, guys? My name's Owen. I'm just used to work in construction here in Ireland. And 3 years ago, when things were going kind of quiet and stuff, I had to think of something for the future. So I went to the renewable, and I'm currently working offshore on the wind farms in the UK. I have 3 years experience in it. I've worked in Wexford, I've worked around Ireland, different places, north of Ireland, and just saying, I'm from Connemara as well. I'd give anything to have turbines back home, to be home working here in Ireland. Talking about noise, when I was in the first wind farms built in Ireland, there was, a big amount of noise from them, but move away from them wasn't that bad. The turbines today, the blades, everything, the technology that they're making, they are progressing massively. Since 3 years difference, they're massive. I've been living on platforms out there less than 500 meters from turbines, 170 around them, on a boat in gales, and it's not massive. It is there, but I'm not sure if you're living beside it, maybe it's a total different thing.
It is.
But there's loads of land, there's loads of places they can be put, especially in Connemara. I know it's beautiful and stuff. I'd give in to be living back there full time.
Are you currently overseas?
2 weeks, and then 1 week at home. I have a house here in Galway City at the moment. But I'd give anything to be back home. And this is the future. Everybody here that's here wants, green energy, wants to save the planet, all this. But definitely there's potential in it. It's making money for a lot of people, but it's to do with planning, and it's to do with communities coming together like they have here, and talking to say, listen, if you put a wind farm here, let's get money into schools, let's get something back off them, instead of just letting them plant them near homes. That's all I have to say.
Thanks for your comment. I'll just take another from the audience now if people want.
Thank you very much for the speech. It's very interesting for me to join the discussion. I think, in my view, Mike and Gabriel, I think both of you can work at the same company. In my view, both of you are looking at the same thing, but maybe in a different view, because Mike is interested for environment and social life and landscape. And if he's looking to these projects, he will find these projects are helping environment, but in indirect way. By using these projects, renewable projects, you will find the amount of saving fossil fuel, energy, and oil that they success to save, which is the main source of pollution and the main source of pollute the environment. So these projects are saving and try to let the environment more clear. This is one point. The second point, I would like to ask Mike, what do you recommend when Ireland need that electricity? What your recommendation, what people have to do once the people in Ireland reach this point, when Ireland is looking for electricity? And the third thing, in my view, to do a renewable energy project, it's better thousands of times to do or to look for a nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants, if you look to these plants, you will find the impact of the environment. It's worse, and it's worse than the fossil fuel and the oils. The last thing, according to our research and according to our study in engineering, natural teach us that it's impossible to have a platonic solution. You have to pay to get or to gain. So there is noise, maybe there is maybe not a good view for landscape, but it's considered a solution, and at least they are trying to find a solution. So in my view, both of you could work at the same track, and they can plan, and you can give them feedback. And by both of you work together, you will get the optimal solution. Thank you.
Yeah, question at the back there. Yeah, right in the middle.
Hi, yeah. Hello. Yep. Okay. My question is to, John and Gabriel. You're mostly Gabriel. You went on a lot about the carbon, fossil fuels, and all this. When you're building those wind turbines, do you take into account the carbon footprint? I believe there's a huge amount of concrete for a base. There's steel mast. Did you take all that into account, and how long the payback is on the economy before the wind turbine actually pays its carbon footprint?
In short answer, we have. And in the construction, we would have specified, in conjunction with the turbine supplier, low carbon options such as concrete, low carbon concrete, etc. And I don't have the exact figures on when you actually get to your balancing point of carbon neutrality. I think it might be 2 years or 3 years or something of that order. But yes, the carbon balance is very, very positive.
Okay. I'll just, at this chance, is there any of the comments that any of you would like to address at any stage? Any of the...
Yep, well, someone asked me a question.
Yes, about alternatives.
And what I was going to say was that I'm not an expert on this, but what I do know is Colin McCarthy is arguing clearly that wind energy is an expensive option in terms of electricity. And he's saying that the more wind energy we use and put onto the grid, the more expensive it becomes. Essentially because it makes the grid unstable. It means that we have to have a lot of backup electricity because the wind only blows 30% of the time. He challenges some of the notion of exporting electricity because some of the issues there will be that the wind blows in the UK pretty much the same time as it blows here. So wind turbines are blowing in the UK much the same time as when they're blowing here. He would argue, and I think he's the man to bring down here to speak to you as a group, because he's the economist and I'm not, and all I can do is read what he said. The Irish pre-tax electricity prices at the moment for households is 19.51, which is higher than France, Germany, the UK. The EU average is 13.73. So our electricity prices are much higher than most of the EU. And he would argue that with wind energy coming on in large quantities, and we're talking about large quantities, let's be clear about this. We have 1,200 wind turbines at the moment. To meet our obligations under the targets for 2020, we need another 1,200 wind turbines. There's already been approval for another 1,800 turbines, and there's 7,500 turbines that are queuing up to be approved. Where was the debate about this?
Can I just very briefly come in? Wind energy per se, by itself, in an island scenario as we are, has a limit. You can only get a certain degree of penetration in wind energy in an island system. As part of the vision for Europe, a kind of a 2020 or 2050 vision, there is a concept known as the European supergrid. And that is a renewable energy grid, a low carbon grid that stretches from Ireland to the Urals, to Scandinavian countries, to North Africa. And it more or less goes something like this. A lot of southern states in Europe will produce solar energy. A lot of the northern states and the western states will produce wind energy and biomass. In the centre you will have France and indeed Britain on nuclear. And all of the grids, it's very interesting, all of the grids in Europe, each of the countries, they're like separate independent islands. And that there has to be a fundamental shift in terms of getting interconnectivity between all the grids. And in that scenario, and with the development of technology and efficient transmission systems, and that's why we have to upgrade our transmission systems, you wind up pooling not alone your renewable resource, but also your backup, or the degree of backup that you need. It becomes a much more efficient system. This is a 20, 30, 40, 50-year vision. This is going to be something that you are going to have to deal with in terms of some of the technical issues and some of the engineering issues associated. But The reality is that we don't have any other option unless we crack the hydrogen opportunity that they've been working on for the last 100 years, or we come up with some other form of energy. The reality is that there are no other options. The fossil fuel era is coming to the end, including the Móna
That's actually
era.
not true. In the United States at the moment, in 4 years, they changed from a position where they were thinking they were going to be running out of oil to now being self-sufficient in energy from hydrocarbons for 150 years. So that's actually not true. I mean, things are changing rapidly in the energy market.
But Mike, you feel in America they're building out renewable energy developments, both solar and wind, at an equally escalating level.
And
They have to reduce the overall carbon intensity of and they know that they have to do that.
Can I say
And
something here?
similarly in Europe.
In the US, what do you think has reduced the most emissions of anything in the US? What's reduced the most emissions? What do you think it is? Any suggestions?
It's replacing
Shale gas.
coal.
Shale gas has closed down more coal-fired power stations than anything else in the US. There's been no coal-fired power stations closed down by wind energy.
John wanted to get in with that.
Just a brief point. Whatever about shale gas, it is still a finite resource. Whether it takes 5 years, 50 years, 100 years, it will run out. And that should not deflect us from trying to develop what is good for this country. And the other thing that's probably worth concern, I would say, before a lot of you get to my age, you will have developed fuel cells that will be able to store electricity, and when this is combined with wind energy, this will solve all the problems.
Okay, question here in the middle. Yeah.
Stephen Dooley, University of Limerick. The energy, the problem, societal problem we're facing is very complicated, and we want to solve it for community dividend, right? That's what we all want the lights to be on. And I think how we're going to do that, as the first questioner suggested, is with honest and ethical debate. And so Mike's kind of central question today, it's been about asking you to endorse his tenfold, Board of Móna to endorse his tenfold displacement ratio. And you haven't answered that question, if you will or not. And it's secondary whether you will endorse it or not. But what I think the forum here needs, and it's a great forum, is you to explain your position on it. So what are the problems with doing that? What does that do to the costs? That presumably a tenfold factor makes the imposition of these turbines unviable from your point of view. So could you answer that specifically?
Well, what it would do is it would certainly restrict the amount of turbines and thereby the efficiency of putting turbines into any plot of ground anywhere. We certainly are involving ourselves in the consultation, so Mike is quite entitled to have his view and to make those views known into the authority, as indeed we are. My central tenet with regards to what I had said earlier on is that it is a planning issue. We have allowed ribbon development and housing development occur in a totally unsustainable manner. And that's not just me talking. I kind of quoted some people who would be better equipped to talk about this. Now, bad enough having done that bad bit of planning that then restrict what is totally viable, totally sustainable, and should be totally accommodatable in a normal planning environment that does go through a very due process. So that's the reason that I won't endorse at this point in time Mike's suggestion, because the implications of it are too, and the detail of it I would want to understand. Well, are you saying, well, no development if the householder objects, or is it no development if there just happens to be a house there? If that house is occupied, does that stop the development? So my point is, yes, spatial planning, and we need to isolate the zones in Ireland. They need to be highlighted of where we can see, and we should allow and permit renewable energy investments such as what we're talking. Those areas should be. Communities such as Templederry and elsewhere should be enabled to come together in a community arrangement amongst themselves and agree if they would like to do this and be supported and enabled where possible, including land being bequeathed from various state agencies if that assisted. Absolutely. But we're talking about sustainable development. I think Brendan's point, I'll go back to it. Sustainable development. Why should properly planned and permitted sustainable development opportunities, such as what we're talking, be disabled or not allowed because of unsustainable, bad spatial practices that have built up over years and indeed continue into the future? If that answers.
We're going to take another one from the audience here. Take another one. Take one here and then one here, and we'll get a few responses then.
Yeah, how's it going? I'm a student studying mechanical engineering here, but I'm also from Westmeath, and there is a possibility of wind farms going into my area. And I'm just wondering about two things. One is noise pollution. Like, I don't know if anyone here has noticed, there's a high humming sound, like, actually, that's going in this theatre at the minute. And it's all well and good with, like, the noise here, but, like, trying to sleep in it, I'd say it couldn't be great. I would wonder, like, is that the noise pollution of the wind farms? Is it something similar to that? And also, my other question was, is all the power generated, is that all going into the Irish economy, or is it going anywhere else? The profit made from it, is it all going into the Irish economy?
Okay, so I guess
that's my two questions.
First question for Mike.
Okay, I'm going to try and replicate the sound. Okay, it's like an aircraft engine that rises and then slowly goes down again, and then rises and slowly goes down. That's the one that there's actually three noises, and it's the low frequency noise that is the killer that most people talk about, the very low frequency. If you read about it, there's three different noises that come, and it's the low frequency one that really wakes. And can I just say to you too, it's not loud. It's as you say, it's probably even slightly less than what's happening in this room. But it's the oscillation of it. It's the oscillation of it which is constantly in your ears, which, when I talk to people, is the real killer. So that's the first question. I want you to answer the question about noise. It's a low-frequency noise, and if you Google it, there's tons of stuff on the internet about it, and people talking about the noise and all the rest of it. It's all there for you to look at. Google it.
Are there like we talk about the noise and people may not like it. Are there health impacts of this noise, and are they documented?
Okay, yes, there are. There's a number of articles about the health impacts. In fact, there was an article written in the British Journal of Medicine by a professor from Belfast and another doctor from England, and they reviewed all the literature about health benefits, and they clearly said that the literature indicated there were health problems associated with wind turbines. Well, my experience is there's some people who have a very high threshold to noise, and they can put up with the noise no problem at all. And there's other people who have a low threshold to the noise and can't put up with it. And that's the reality of it. And, you know, I've seen people and I've met people who have been psychiatrically impacted by the noise from wind turbines. Their mental health has deteriorated. A lot of the impact, I think, comes from lack of sleep, because it's usually at night, when you're lying in bed at night, that low frequency noise gets into your ear hole, and it's every night. Repetitively, you've got no control over it, you wake up several times through the night, you can't get back to sleep, and that's the noise which is the killer for people. And it penetrates walls. People will tell me that it penetrates the walls of their houses. The higher frequency noises can be blocked out by closing windows, all the rest of it, you don't hear it in the house. But it's the low frequency noise, and go and Google it, go and find out for yourself, it's all there on the internet.
We've had a 7.5 megawatt wind farming rolling for the last 25 years up in northwest Mayo. There are some houses in the vicinity. There are people living in the vicinity. I suspect that the nearest one is probably about maybe 500 or 600 metres away. I suspect, not 100% sure on that, but there are certainly, and you have to get, depending on what way you you get your camera and so forth, you can actually show the house to be very close or very far away. You nearly have to go there and just see it yourself. In the 25 years that we've been there, we've not had any complaints. We had no complaints against the planning permission, and we have had no issues or no complaints or no reports of any medical hearing or any other medical issues arising. So I can only talk to the facts as I know them as they pertain.
Gabriel, can I ask how many people who've been impacted by the noise from wind turbines, who have been in the paper, publicly declaring, taking a lot of guts and courage to put their case in the newspapers? There have been several families doing that. How many of those people have you met? Have you found out exactly what's going on for them?
Yeah, we've actually met quite a few, and I have myself. We went to consultation, and we're a community-based organisation. Bord na Móna probably epitomises a community-based organisation. We've had a number of all-day information events in a variety of different locations in the Midlands as we rolled out and our proposals with regards to a clean energy hub. And we've had obviously a number of people who had issues and have issues, and rightly so. They made their points very clearly known
So
to us.
Gabriel, you agree that people are impacted by the noise from wind turbines? You agree with that?
Well, you know what? If you want to do anything in this country, there's going to be an impact. I think one of the previous speakers said, you know, unfortunately, no matter what it is, like you're talking and espousing the virtues of shale, and I don't,
No, I'm not,
I don't
I'm not
agree or
espousing the
disagree
virtues.
with you.
I want a debate about energy. I know nothing about shale gas. All I want is a debate. That's what I want.
I don't disagree with the virtues, but the point about it is that once it's proposed, immediately you get a lot of naysayers who come out who don't want to know, they don't want to even investigate it. The reality is that we do a lot of consultation, and for every person that we've had coming into any of our information sessions, given out or complaining or whatever, we've had at least 2, 3 more coming in, wondering about the job opportunities, the economic opportunities, and so forth.
Okay, we're going to take a question here from this gentleman. I'm just conscious of time. We will get to your second question that you asked about the energy destination. We'll get to that.
Hello, my name is John Power. Just an observation on the large developers can come in and take over all the prime sites in an area, and there's very little, okay, the people who owned the site benefit directly, and there's no opportunity for people within the community to invest. Maybe there should be an obligation on developers to leave a window of opportunity for local investors, say 10% or 20% of the investment would come from the local community. Now, that basically what we have had I'm with John in Templederry Energy, and we kept it to 100% of local investment, which was quite unusual, and it succeeded in spite of all the difficulties, and we had quite a number of difficulties. We were 10 years actually before we brought this to fruition. A point I would like to take with Mike, I can't understand how 3 years ago somebody could erect an anemometer, I presume it was, on close proximity to him without being unaware of it, because the obligation is there to publish planning. Oh, well, that's the situation.
We spoke to the council about it, and they have you could for 18 months put up a wind testing mast, and then after that you have to apply for planning permission. You're allowed to do that, and we actually went to the county council about. Of course we did,
yes.
And they clearly said no, that they're under the wind planning guidelines. Check it out for yourself, guys. Yeah. Unless it's changed since then.
Yeah.
It was actually 4 years ago. I remember rightly, it came up not 3 years ago. It was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was 2010.
Yeah, but there was also the point you said that you were suddenly confronted with the prospect of 20 turbines within your area. I find that difficult in where a community, as you have outlined there, that they would have been unaware of that.
We were totally unaware of it.
Well, that I find it a little bit unbelievable.
It's true.
I'm not doubting your
It's
word.
in the document. I give you newspaper articles to show you, because we're interviewed by the Roscommon Herald, we're interviewed by RTE News about it.
Yeah, well,
they came to the mountain and interviewed us, and that was all in the public media at that time.
The planning obligation is to publish the notice in a local newspaper. I mean, you can't do a development in Donegal and publish the advertisement in the Waterford News or something or other like that. So that would be rather unusual. And also, you speak about the idea of fracking, and that's quite new to us. We know that we have in this country a very valuable asset in the top 6 or 8, 10 inches of the soil, and that's its ability to grow crops and grow healthy beef and dairy products. Maybe it's because of the underlying aquifers that exist in this country, and if we interfere with those through a fracking process, you may lose that wealth of fertility in the topsoil. We don't know. The Americans have vast areas where they're going to carry that out. Again, they are overriding the objections that their own aquifers may be damaged by the fracking process. It's a whole new process.
Listen, can I say, I'm not pro-fracking. I've never said I was. I'm just looking for a debate. I know the issues of fracking. I'm aware of the problems of the water supply. It's very clear. I'm not pro-fracking, but what I don't see is a rational and reasonable debate about all the energy options. Instead, we're going hell for leather for wind energy, and we're not actually having a debate about it. That's the issue.
Okay. I'm just very conscious of time here. I just would like, if Gabriel can maybe address the second question that the gentleman near the back asked about the destination of where the energy from these wind farms is going. Bord na Móna is involved in one of the large-scale energy export projects, so I wonder if you could...
Well, currently the destination of all renewable energy is onto the national grid, and the process for going through permitting and planning and so forth, the rules only enable that. Obviously there's discussions going on about an intergovernmental agreement to enable the export of renewable energy from Ireland to the United Kingdom. And so we'll see where that takes us. But in short answer, it's all on the Irish grid.
Okay. And would you like to make any comment about the energy export plans?
Yeah, well, again, you know, like we're coming back to this. The critical issue is this: is that the Irish capacity to efficiently produce renewable energy from wind is much greater than any other European country, bar Scotland. Britain has got a big energy crunch facing it. Like a lot of European countries, it's been slow to decide what it's going to do with its next investment in nuclear. They have just about decided that, and they're facing a big shortage of energy, particularly over the next between 5 and 10 year period. So they're looking around, they're trying to get as much onshore on their own land as they can. They're trying to get as much offshore. The issue with offshore is that it's very, very cost prohibitive, it's very expensive. So the technology is there for us to actually supply. We've got enough renewable energy resources to supply a population and supply a grid maybe 10 or 20 times our current size. It's a little bit like the food industry. We produce enough food for about 55 million people simply because of our location and our natural advantages. And similarly, ditto with renewable energy. So it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to bring that gentleman back in Ireland, and for other communities in Ireland to really reap the rewards. And we get more of the value added in this country. And the turbine manufacturers and the supply chains required to do that have committed to doing that if we can get the sort of scale into the system that we're talking about. And in fact, about construction, there's a massive construction dividend here as well.
Okay,
I know one construction tower man there in halfway up the hall who would see a big opportunity in this.
Okay, so we're seeing some potentially large-scale economic benefits there. I just want to try and get some final words in. Mike, if you'd like to make some final...
Just on the economics, I mean, it's a wonderful idea, the supergrid, and exporting electricity. It's a lovely idea. What happens if the UK goes hell for leather into nuclear or into fracking or into offshore cheaper wind energy, and they find an energy source which is much cheaper than the exported wind from the UK? Already the Scotland is going big into wind energy, and it's much, much cheaper to get wind from Scotland because there's no underground cabling under the sea. What happens if the UK decides, actually, the Irish energy is too expensive? We've got all these excess wind turbines that our grid can't hold, we can't manage. You know, our grid can only cope with so much wind energy because you need backup to match the wind energy when the wind isn't blowing. The wind only blows 30% of the time. We can only manage a certain number of wind turbines, and all these ones built for export, we won't be able to manage. What happens if the UK decides they don't want our electricity? Then who's going to dismantle those wind turbines? We're going to be left with a whole lot of old technology all over our landscape. And can I just say this? I spoke to someone in the US recently, and I was really interested. He said in parts of the US now, wind energy is old technology. They already are saying that about wind energy in the US. And there are wind farms now which are no longer operating but are sitting idle because they're seen as inefficient and old technology.
Well, just to correct a couple of factual points there, the Midlands of Ireland is closer to the Greater London area than the Scottish borders. Scotland has a massive issue trying to get wheel power into England, and in fact their proposals at the moment are to wheel it out onto the Irish Sea and onto the North Sea and put it in a process called bootstrapping, kind of to loop around to try and get down, and that's simply because of the population densities in Britain, which are much greater than they are in Ireland. The technology is proven. That we can agree on. This is proven technologies. Once you have your wind turbine up and spinning, then it's a maintenance issue. Your short-term running costs are zero.
Well, this debate has to occur with Cole McCarthy, who's much more knowledgeable than me, and he's the person who's saying these things, plus a few other quite knowledgeable things about it. But, you know, I agree with one thing Gabriel's saying. We need a debate. We need to have people arguing these issues and debating them like we have today.
Well, no doubt the debate will continue. About Colin McCarthy and getting an economist on here, I don't think any economist could be as informative and entertaining as the three of you were tonight. They call it the dreary science, I think. So you've all been, I think, keeping the crowd very entertained. John, I wonder, would you like to make any final comments?
Well, I suppose just to sum up, like Michael says, we do need to improve the planning process. And in fairness, I think every local authority around the country is trying to do that. And they are coming under severe pressure, which is being caused by unreasonable debate. Like he says, reasonable debate is definitely required. But the planning process, and we have found them always try to deal with everything very fairly and take into account the other's point of view. And I think the authorities are trying to do the right thing. As regards the overall development of wind, I think that it cannot be let go by the wayside. It is our best natural resource at the present time. Maybe it will change in 25 or 30 years' time, but a lot of technology will come on stream in the meantime. Hopefully we'll have the electric cars, which we won't need oil for those, and hopefully fuel cells will be developed where we'll be able to store electricity, and wind will really come into its own, that you won't have to have a backup supply. And if Ireland is in a reduced energy situation at the moment, well then stop importing oil, don't cut off the wind. And I think for all of you, wind could be something really big for this country. I think it will improve the environment, it will improve our balance of payments, it will regenerate our economy in many, many ways, both local and national. And I would ask you all to progress it in a fair and reasonable way in your own areas, as best you can.
Okay, well, that's a nice sentiment to end on, fair and reasonable. So I'd just like to thank our speakers involved tonight. I thought it was absolutely fascinating myself, and I noted someone's comment up there that they found it a reasoned debate. I was very much informed by that debate, so thank you all very much. I'd like to introduce the director of Energy Night this year, Aoife Weeks, and she's going to make some closing remarks before we let you all go home.
I'm just going to be short and just want to. Okay. We just have a list of thank yous that need to be made. First of all, the College of Engineering and Informatics, the Royal Institute for Environmental, Marine and Energy Research, and the Society's Office who funded this whole event. We'd like to thank the Career Development Centre who helped organise the careers part of this night, and we would thank the 6 companies that came and talked as well. We'd like to thank our 3 speakers for the panel discussion. We'd also like to thank the Press Office and Engineers Ireland who helped publicise this event. Then we'd like to thank the Buildings Office, Rory Monaghan, who has been on hand from day one and has been with us since October, since we first started down, trying to organise tonight. Dalton as well, who has been a big help in the last week or two, trying to organise everything. Then we have all the tour guides, lab technicians, demonstrators, GMIT for bringing over the electric car, the first aiders who we didn't need as well, thankfully. Then we'd like to thank Mark White for taking all the photos tonight and for keeping up the website up to date. We'd like to thank Sinead Burke as well for keeping an eye on the social media. Then we'd like to thank Staunton Media for recording tonight's event, and for Faheen as well, who's working as a volunteer tonight. Thanks to all the postgrads who submitted posters for the showcase. I was getting a bit worried near the end when I had about 1 with 3 days to go till the closing date, but they all came in around 5 o'clock on Friday. And then we'd like to thank the judges as well who took the time to go through the posters. I'd like to thank Mary and Carmel upstairs as well, who let their office turn it into my store press for Energy Night material over the last 2 weeks. We talked a lot about community tonight, and this event wouldn't have been possible without the community that exists here in this building. The Energy Society organised the event, and that is the committee is a mix of engineers from different disciplines across different years, and everyone came together, and the people were helping that weren't involved as well over the last few days, whether it was to move a few chairs or set up a live feed. No one said no, although at this stage when people see me coming, they know I'm looking for something, so people are kind of avoiding me now, but there's a great sense of community in this building. And I'd just like to read out the list of names as well for the people that are involved tonight, because I think they all deserve a mention. We have the 2 Jareds, 2 Shanes, Stephen, Justin, Gary, Kate, Aaron, Brian, Dylan, Aisling, Deirdre, Sarika, Edward, Owen and Connor. And without them it wouldn't have been possible. So thank you everyone for coming as well.
I think Shane has an announcement to make. No? No one has an announcement to make? Stephen has an announcement to make. This Shane has an announcement to make. There's 2 Shanes.
There's one thank you that you didn't give, and that's to yourself, Aoife. I don't think everyone really realises how much work you put into this, and it's absolutely incredible the amount. I'm amazed, we're all amazed, and you put in such an effort, and you really were the foundation of what went on here today, and it wouldn't have been possible without you. So I'd like to present you with a bouquet of flowers.
Okay, you can all go home, study for tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.